Good morning.
Good morning, Governor Walz. How are you?
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're live right now, so thank you for the interview. I'm Al McFarlane. This is a special edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane, talking to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. This is Black History Month, and Governor Walz, thank you for taking time to reflect on what it means to Minnesota in general, what it means to you personally. So let me start by asking you to talk about the significance of your Black History Month proclamation.
Yeah, well, Al, thanks for having me. And I think first and foremost, as you know, as a just a person and as a history teacher, being a public school teacher for all those years, we saw Black History Month as an opportunity to tell that history, to celebrate those achievements. And while it may be frustrating to some folks, many of our children don't get those stories. They don't know where they come from. They don't know the heroes beyond. It's good that they know on the civil rights leaders, but business leaders and scientific leaders and artistic leaders and all of those that go with this. So I think for me as a teacher, it was part of that. And I think as governor of Minnesota, using those proclamations is very clear, to use this month as an opportunity to refocus. And I think over the last several years, what we've seen, it becomes more important than ever. To make sure we tell this history. So it's important. I hope our families took the opportunity to talk with their students. I hope we've seen, whether it be private businesses or state government, lifting up those achievements and talking about the importance, and then having the courage to talk about what we still have to do. There is no shame, and I'm incredibly proud of this state, but there's no shame in saying we have to do better in some areas. And I think Black History Month gives us that opportunity.
So, what specifically are you doing, Governor Walz, to honor Black History Month? Any particular projects that you're involved in?
Yeah, and it's just, well, when we think about this, I talk often now, we unveil a budget and we talk about a budget being a fiscal document and a moral document, making sure those equity pieces are in there, whether that be equity and bonding to Black-owned businesses or to highlight the contributions to what this economy looks like going forward, making sure we have Black leaders in positions to make decisions. I'm very proud of our administration. Probably has the most diversity we've seen, from public safety to revenue to state government administration. Those are all strong Black leaders that are leading the state in many of those areas. And then I think highlighting, I'll be in a conversation tomorrow with some statewide leaders of lifting up and using my office's platform to lift those voices up. And again, we can be talking about successes in business. My friend Houston White, who I'm proud of and things he's done, but also to have the conversations that we all have three names from Deshaun, Amir, and Jamari that are now added to that list of young Black men who are no longer with us because of gun violence. And so I think, dealing in the moment, looking towards a future, and then making sure that we're highlighting specific things that government can do, whether it be budgets or policies or leadership positions, of making sure that Black leaders are being highlighted, certainly during this month. And I know that the pushback on Black History Month that we always get is it should be every single day of the year. That's absolutely true. We understand that. But I think pausing during February to do a little above and beyond helps bring that focus a little clearer.
You mentioned you've got a great team, perhaps the most diverse team that includes Black leaders in your administration. Take a minute, if you would, to say their names and to talk about what they do for you and with you and for the citizens of Minnesota. I think sometimes not hearing it, you take things for granted, and there's value in saying it.
Yeah, no, commissioners. Obviously, folks are familiar with John Harrington, probably the most experienced public safety and police officer in the state, over 40 years of service, St. Paul chief, now at the Department of Public Safety, having him in there. All three of the top posts over there were Black leaders. I think you take a look at Department of Revenue. It's where the money goes. And Black leaders have told me this often: don't put us in positions just to say you put us in positions. Put us in positions to use our talents to lead. Robert Doty over at Revenue, tough work. I mean, he processes all the tax returns, processes all the law changes, able to do that. Alice Roberts Davis manages all of state government management. And during COVID, this is the woman who was behind getting all of those tests, getting all of those vaccines, setting up and creating contracts to do all of this. She comes as a highly skilled executive, could have worked anywhere she wanted to. Commissioner Robertson over at the Department of Labor and Industry, protecting workers during this time, a leading voice in making sure that if we're going to ask folks to go into workplaces, they're going to be respected, safe, and put in a place to be successful. And I think those names go on and on. These are major roles, and you know, a lot of times what we saw in the past was we'd put Black leaders in positions around housing, for example. Not to say that's not important, but you need people who are in charge, who are dealing with public safety, dealing with revenue, dealing with the business of procurement, making sure that for years, Black businesses had a heck of a time trying to get contracts, and they still do have challenges of you're starting out, you want to get a contract with state government. Those are lucrative. Those are good. Those are important. And we don't create that wealth in the community. So I think having a leader like Alice over there, make sure she knows where things are coming from. And I think for most people, they're not asking for anything above and beyond. They're asking to be treated fairly as everyone else. And I think in this country, we know with those systemic barriers that are in place, you got to have folks that understand and are willing to make the push. So I couldn't be prouder of those folks. And there's numerous others, but I think 4 of those major commissioners make a huge difference.
You mentioned Houston White, my friend and fellow North Side businessman. Who else do you work with regularly in the community? And I
Yeah.
ask the question in the sense of this whole idea of Black role models. Do you, Tim Walz, have role models in the Black community?
Yeah, and I think I appreciate you asking that question now, because I think one of the things is, you know, this isn't a monolithic community. There's voices all over, and
Mhm.
I feel proud to have Houston as a friend. He's an incredible entrepreneur. He has a vision. He's funny. He whips me at golf whenever I can get out a few times. I don't know what the guy can't do, but I think he's also there to provide a very grounded thing. When friends tell friends when things could go better or things could go different. And I think in this community, just running off a few names,
Mhm.
working with Bishop Howell, Reverend Babington Johnson, you know, the Stair Step Foundation,
Mhm.
21 Days of Peace, folks. I consider them friends, and they pick up the phone, and they pick up the phone in good and bad times. I've worked some with Spike Moss, who has been at this for a long time. And those who know Spike, when I'm failing, he's going to let me know it. And I think that's important. I've become friends, and I wished it wouldn't have been these circumstances, with KG Wilson, who many of you
Mhm.
know lost his beautiful granddaughter in one of these random shootings, this unconscionable violence. KG sends me pictures. He keeps in touch and asks what we can do. And then I think when I first said I was going to run for governor, 3 people really took me under their arm a little bit and started showing me the community. Debbie Montgomery, Margaret Coleman, and Yusuf and Jeannie over here in St. Paul. But a lot of these young leaders, Leslie Redmond has called me out on things that needed to be called out on, called me out as governor of Minnesota, and has taken the time to help me try and understand, and watching young Black leaders. And I have to tell you, Al, I feel incredibly blessed to be surrounded by people, and I hope they know that I'm trying to do the best I can to understand the community's needs. But what I've learned from all of them, is that the community knows what's best for the community, and we need to trust to make sure that they're put in positions to lead. And I think us creating partnerships, understanding my role is just one person at the table, and that these communities, whether it be business, arts, public safety, and I do have to say, Al, I again am grateful for all the things in my life, but I think maybe you know this. I had the chance to serve for 12 years with John Lewis in Congress, and
Mhm.
to be able to call somebody like John Lewis your friend. John took me to Alabama on several occasions. He sat us down in the 16th Street Baptist Church, and then introduced me to Addie Mae Collins' sister, who lost her little sister when they blew that bomb up,
Mhm.
in that church,
Mhm.
and walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with John Lewis. I mean, of seeing in the flesh that this wasn't someone out of a history book, and this wasn't something out of the 1960s. It was right here today. So the community's strong here, and whether they're fighting for equity and education, or whether they're fighting to reverse the problems we had when we tore Rondo apart. There's activists up and down from local level all the way to the state level to see these Black leaders now in positions of authority in the legislature. It gives me hope. It gives me hope that we can fix this. But I know I'm listening to the community. Between the pandemic and the gun violence, more work to be done.
How do you explain, Governor Waltz, the expansive set of disparities between Black and white in Minnesota? You've listed and named a number of credible, important leaders, people that are committed to improvement, not only of the Black community, but for all Minnesota. But what's the environment that we all are operating in? How do you explain that Minnesota is one of the best places in the world to live for white people, but not so for Black people?
Yeah.
What has made that so? And how does this conversation address and seek to resolve that conundrum?
No, it's a great question, Al. And I think adding to that list of folks who are talking about this gap, obviously Justice Page around education. I think we first of all need to acknowledge, and this is one that, again, it seems probably self-evident to many of folks listening and watching, that systemic racial barriers have caused this. The inability to have generational wealth created because of starting behind to start with. That is a big deal. And for Minnesotans, I think this gap is much more apparent because, as you said, Al, the successful nature of where the white community has been able to, whether it be educational achievement, business startups, and things like that, puts us at a disadvantage. And I do think some of this is cultural, Al, the inability to just call this out. I mean, I was very proud when we were able to issue a posthumous pardon to Max Nason. Took us 100 years to acknowledge that a crowd of 10,000 gathered in Duluth and lynched several young Black innocent folks and then sent Max to prison. I think those are the types of things that we have to have this conversation. And I know people are engaged, and I see parents going to school boards. I'm glad of that. I hope the Black parents are there too, because I'll tell you what, our kids are strong enough. If Ruby Bridges could walk in that school in New Orleans, that little girl, our kids can hear about what happened. And then I think acknowledging that, I think we've seen this globally. We saw it in South Africa. If you're not willing to have a truth and reconciliation around what's happened in the past, it's very difficult to move forward. So I think here we're still struggling to have that conversation. And then I think we've seen these barriers. Why is it that Black businesses don't get procurement through state contracts as a highest level? Many of it is because of institutional barriers. And then having this conversation around school, our children need to be in a position where they're safe in their homes, they're food secure, and they have the opportunities that everyone else has. So I think it's a combination of things. I think it's a combination of an inability to address some of these past differences. And then I think some of it is that we've got to trust the community itself to be able to lead and make these decisions. I think there's been a real hesitancy to move resources and money into community where they make their decisions. And that's kind of, I hope my budget starts to reflect. You don't need, you don't need someone, a white person riding in and fixing the problems here. What you need to do is remove the barriers, make it fair, and let folks lead. And I think that's hopefully the conversation we're starting to move to.
Minnesota has the dubious reputation, Governor, of being ground zero for what's the right word for it? For the challenges of race and justice,
yes,
law enforcement, etc. George Floyd, recently Amir, before that Dante Wright. And so how do we take these horrific incidences, and you've referred to it already, I think, and turn them into stepping stones, learnings, teachings that reflect what humans are capable of transforming themselves into as a community, as a society, as a state? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one thing, Al, we got to get rid of these false choices of things and take, for example, the public safety piece of this. We cannot accept this of these these police involved shootings that take the life of young men. Again, we're thrust back into the center of this with the mirror lock. But we also can't accept our children being shot on the streets in gun violence. And we need police, we need public safety working with community. And I think the way I see it is we can get beyond some of that. Minnesota can prove this. And I think we need to seize the moment that the world was watching in 2020. And I said it then, and I still say it now, Al. I'm afraid if we don't continue to make progress on this, when will we? When will we? And tens of thousands of people out in the streets legitimately expressing this generational grief. We had folks take advantage of that and turn that into violent situations. I think many of you know, Al, the people that were most hurt by that were the Black-owned businesses.
Yep.
and families. And so I think getting rid of this false choice on this, there's some that we're going to be tough on crime. That's fine, but we better be tough on the causes of crime, and we better be willing to recognize that the systemic racial barriers and racism that created lack of home ownership, lack of school achievement. It's not because this, our children can learn, that they can learn, they can achieve, but what's holding them back? And so I'm still committed and believe that this is an opportunity. But what I fear, Al, is that kind of a reverting back. And what we're seeing now is that we do need to be tough on crime, but mass incarceration of Black youth is not going to fix this problem. We have to have a more holistic approach, whether it be investments early on in home ownership and schools, whether it be gun related issues to get those guns off the streets, or whether it be making sure we're targeting the people who are doing this, because it's certainly not the entire population, but there are folks that are preying on others. And the statistics on this is these shootings are predominantly hurting the Black community. Mm-hmm. That's who's in the middle of this.
Let me close with your comments, your thoughts on the political landscape, 22 and 24. What are the stakes? What are the issues? And how do you motivate both awareness, engagement, involvement, people taking their civic responsibility very seriously and making sure that the will of the people is not subverted by initiatives to derail, marginalize voters, suppress voters?
Yeah. And this isn't, I don't say this as a pejorative, but it's clear there are folks that want to make it more difficult to vote. I make no bones about it. Voting should be one of the easiest things you do. When people bring up this, well, you got to have a license to do this. None of that is relevant to the point of being able to exercise the most important right you have, to be able to cast that vote. So I think here in Minnesota, I'm very proud that we have few barriers to voting. And of course, as we know, we have almost no election fraud at all that has ever occurred. So I think we need to set that narrative right. I do think what's at stake is this continued idea that we should shrink who votes. Some folks aren't even pretending anymore. They're saying it straight up right. We're back to the old, if you're not a landowner, you're not going to vote. And, we've seen this. We've taken away the rights of felons to vote. They do their time, they come back out, and we still make it hard for them to vote. Mm-hmm. They should have every right to do that. And I think what I think's at stake is that ability to have people engaged. And if it becomes harder for people to vote, it won't just be about certain groups losing elections. It'll be about a cynicism that sinks into people and they quit being engaged. And I'll tell you, when people are oppressed and they have no legal way to fix that, is it any wonder that they're going to turn to the streets? Is it any wonder that they're going to turn to things? Because that is the only way to bring about change. So I think here in Minnesota, continuing to engage, I'm going to continue to make the case that we're one Minnesota. I know some have said, well, since you've been elected, it's been worse on that. Between the global pandemic and George Floyd and others, there's no doubt that that's strained, but I'm still convinced the way out of this is to see ourselves interconnected in this, see that if the Black community is doing well, the white community is doing well, the indigenous community is going to be doing well, and to keep moving in that direction. So I don't think it'll be easy. I think there are those that would like to turn back the clock. I'm not interested in that. And I think here in Minnesota, there's enough leadership coming out of the communities that they're not going to allow it to happen either.
What's the playbook, Governor, for you and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan? What's on the political agenda for both of you, the strategy?
Yeah. I think getting out and talk to as many people as possible, making the case that when the times were tough, we led. I accepted responsibility, willing to put out programs that work. And I think the biggest thing is if if I wanted to hear what I would like someone to say is that he listened, learned, and worked with the communities themselves to make Minnesota a better place to live. My goal, Alison, when I took this job, was to make Minnesota the best place in the country to raise a family and have a child. I think we have a lot of reasons to be hopeful about that, but we're leaving some folks behind. And so I think our goal is to get out there and talk to people, show them that politics can be joyful. It can be something to lift up your life. Your voice matters. It's not about denigrating the other side. It's not about, catchphrases or making fun of people. It's about saying, this is what I'm going to do. I'll use my position to be a part of that. And I'll stand up and take responsibility when it doesn't work. And I think that's what we've done. The news around COVID is looking better. Our state has a budget that can start to correct some of these paths. We have folks out there who are leading. Now we just need to bring it together and make it happen.
Governor Tim Walz, thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Al. Good to see you.
Take care.